let me just introduce you guys. Paul Corder has been around Journey for a long, long while. I actually met him back in, right after college maybe, and he was in our band, and I actually met him. He was working at AT&T for a while. He became a store manager, and then he became an area manager for AT&T, worked for them for 7 or 8 years, and now he is director of sales with Hub International, which is formerly Peel and Holland, and so he's made quite a career of that. He has a lovely wife, Diane, who is just sweet as can be. She's a photographer, and they have 2 lovely little boys. So, Paul, would you join me on stage? Everybody welcome Paul Corder to the stage. You did say earlier you were going to run on stage. That's awesome. Well, you did a great job with that.
It's weird. I'm here. I'm standing. I have no guitar. I'm like Ricky Bobby. Like, I don't know what to do with my hands right now. It's so weird.
Yeah,
I'm actually nervous, like sweating nervous right now. So this is going to be awesome, I hope.
Yeah, it's going to be great, Paul. Yeah, we discussed whether or not he just wanted to hold it for comfort, like to be up here and strum.
He's not joking. I had one on stage during run through, and he was like, "No, dude, you can't do that."
Yeah. So, Paul, did I miss anything in your bio? Is there anything you need to add to that?
You hit everything.
Okay, great.
Everything.
Great. Well, let's just jump into your story, Paul. I would love to know, where did your story of faith begin? How did you get started in all this?
Yeah, so it's pretty boring. I grew up in church, my whole life. That's all I knew growing up. And my dad was in the military, and he got out of the Marines, hoorah, when I was 9 years old. And we moved to Kentucky, moved literally right across the pond from my grandparents, and we were there for a little while. And so where my faith journey really began was a Friday night of a revival back home, 9 years old. I don't know if any of y'all have ever been to a real revival, but I couldn't sleep that Friday night. I was so scared. So I woke my dad up. It was 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was like, "Dad, I don't want to go to hell." And he was like, "What are you talking about? It's raining." And I was like, "No, I'm so scared right now." And my dad was so awesome. He woke up, we went and sat in the living room, and we talked for 3 hours. And he talked to me about how being saved was so much more than just not going to hell. There was the opportunity to live like Jesus did, to walk like Jesus did. And we talked a lot about that. And so that helped me out a whole lot. But that night, I let Jesus into my heart, and and through that time, and I grew up in a really, really, really small church. We're talking 40 people every Sunday, piano, organ, pulpit, the works. Yeah. And so for me, that's what I knew growing up of what church was. But it was great because I had so many people during that time period that helped shape me foundationally and to help me be who I am today. And there were times where it's as an adult, I appreciate that a lot more than I did when I was younger. I think a lot of that is because once I grew out of that church, right, I went to college, I didn't necessarily find myself in a hurry to find somebody to help me grow in my faith during that time.
Yeah, because those people couldn't go to college with you.
No, I tried. There were a couple people I was like, "You might want to tag along with me. Things might go awry." Yeah. But they didn't. But I got to college, and that was when I realized very quickly that the world wasn't exactly what I had experienced, as younger, going through high school in that small church. There was a lot more temptation during that time period. I'll call it. And when I was in college, there was a lot more fun to be had. So in that time period for me, once I got to college, I didn't really focus on growing in my faith. I would say that I wouldn't even say that I plateaued. I would say I just kind of dropped off the radar when it comes to my walk with God and my faith during that time period. And there was just a lot, during that time period that happened, because college is a time to you explore, you try, and it's I wasn't the best version of myself. Now I did, I dropped out of college for a little while, went back to college, met Diane, who's now my wife, and so we were finishing up school. And I will say that the next time I went back to school, I was a different person. I was a little more
second
mature.
Second chances.
Dad wasn't writing the checks anymore, so it was I really probably need to try, otherwise I'm going to be like Tommy Boy and be in college for 7 years. and I was close. But during that time period too, though, it's like I got engaged. I had a job lined up coming out of college, and in April of 2010, so literally a month before I was slated to graduate, I found out that I had been diagnosed with cancer. And so, like, the world just kind of like turned a little upside down during that time period.
Yeah.
And you would think that I would be like, oh, okay, God, like, got it, message loud and clear. No, like, I was angry during that time period because, yeah, we had things lined up. We had a wedding date lined up. We had, I had a job lined up. We had a house that we were about to move into. And so I went through my cancer diagnosis, all 2 years of that, almost feeling a little bit bitter, but also I think a lot of it too, like, it was a little bit of a shakeup because it was like, I did realize that there was no way that I was going to be able to get through this alone. And even Diane during that time period as well. And I'll never forget, I think it was my grandma or somebody that was like, well, God will never give you more than you can handle. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that he might be doing that right now.
Well, I mean, that's often things that we feel like are, kind of encouraging in those moments, but it's actually a misquote of a verse, right? I'd like to point out for those of you, if you're saying that or you've heard that said, like, that specific verse is talking about temptation. It's not talking about the heavy circumstances of life that are out of your control, because there's a lot of things that are out of your control.
Yeah.
Cancer was out of your control, and it was more than you could bear.
100. And so, but I will say, to that though, and if you want to like play into that vein that my grandmother or whomever it was that said that, it was like, that was more than I could handle, but it was amazing who God brought into my life during that time period that was just showing up. They weren't pouring, hey, like, you probably really need to think about like really getting better with God and stuff, but they were just there. They were present, and there were people that I had been around growing, through college and whatnot, that all of a sudden they were like, whoa, bro, like, that is way too much for me to handle. Like, I'm going to see the back door. But like, the people that stayed, the people that showed up, like, those are still connections with people that I have today.
Wow.
And it's amazing. And I will say this, like, the cancer, the diagnosis and going through chemo and going through the surgeries and all of that was one thing. But I will tell you, like, having to also go through that, like, had zero insurance going through that cancer diagnosis. So, like, having to navigate that financially during that time period was one thing. But also, there was also a moment during that time period where the doctors were very much like, because of the type of cancer that you have, because of the types of treatments that you're going through, there is a really good chance that you're going to come out of this infertile.
Wow.
And you want to talk about like a punch in the gut to be like, man, okay, whew. Fortunately, Diane's dad was a doctor. We took proper precautions leading up to that to like give us a shot later on. But we also wanted to hold on to hope that like, things are going to be okay, right? So it's like that piece, the financial piece, and then also like the thing that they don't tell you about is like, you go through all of this and you get to the other side and a doctor looks at you and goes, hey man, you're cancer free. Like, wow. we don't see anything. And you're relieved and you're just like, oh my gosh, like, like the journey is over. But what they don't also tell you is that there's a whole nother journey that happens after that. And that journey is like navigating life after cancer. And like, you walk out of that doctor's appointment and they go, okay, like, you're free to be like a normal human being now, but you're not a normal human being. Like, you've just gone through this battle for 2 years. You're so busy. You're going 100 miles an hour. You don't have time to think. And then by the time it's all over, you still don't feel great. And then also, like, there's this emptiness inside that you're just like, who am I? Like, my whole identity changed in 2 years. And I didn't really think about that until it was like, I need to go find a job. I need to go do these things. But it's like, I can't get through an entire day because you're just like, you're drained. And I didn't know it. I'm pretty sure I was probably pretty depressed during that time period, but like, I hadn't stopped long enough to think about that. And so, I've never been more happy to say, like, I found an opportunity with a job like AT&T, to just like get me going again. And what that did is it allowed me to be so busy during that time period that I was able to just kind of forget about everything else. And that big thing that I'd forgotten about during that time period was the infertility piece. And it wasn't until that we had an opportunity, we moved to Owensboro, so we left church, and I guess I'll backpedal a little bit. What brought me to Journey was my wife, was being a photographer, was being introduced to people like Brett and Mackenzie, who, you know, are Matt and Jen. And like during that time period, they were just like, hey, like, show up. Like, just give it a shot, see what happens. And at the time, I was also working for Murray State at Lovett Auditorium. So I don't know if any of y'all remember Wesley Hughes, but he's somebody that I worked with there. And was just like, hey,
he was on our production team.
He was on production team, and he's clever. Like, he was a good salesman, because he was like, hey, man, I know you're not in church right now. Come run the board one Sunday, because that's what I was doing with Lovett. I was running sound, and I was like, man, yeah, I'll come and do it. And then like 2 weeks later, I'm up on stage playing guitar. So I was like, well played, Wesley Hughes, if you're watching this.
So even through all this, there were some nuggets of faith that were there, but these people came in at a crucial moment when you were trying to really ignore God and trying to be a little bit bitter, but they came in and kind of showed you that there's a different way to do faith as an adult.
That was the key, is that, you know, if it hadn't been for those people just showing up in my life at the right time, I wouldn't be sitting here right now having this conversation. And you know, and so we had gotten pretty well plugged in here before I had the opportunity to move to Owensboro to take a job. And I'll tell you, you realize, you know, you have your community, you pack up and you leave, and then you realize you don't have anybody.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, that was about the time in our marriage where it was like we really were talking about having children. All of our friends around us were having kids. And I mean, we were just broken during that time period. And I'll never forget, like, it was easier for me because like I could work through all of that. But you had my wife who was sitting in the house that we had there in Owensboro at the time. And I mean, it was really a really, really dark time, but it was a really good time in our lives too, because we started to see some healing. We started to communicate better during that time period. I don't know if you guys know this, guys aren't always the best listeners. So it gave me an opportunity to stop and just listen for a moment and better understand like where my life is. Because when you talk about infertility and you think about being in a point in your life where like the possibility of like not being able to have kids is a real thing, like it hurts. It hurts to think about that, like you can't share that surprise with your families. You can't do any of that. And it also hurts even worse when you see all of your friends around you are in the point in their life where they're having children and you're not part of that conversation. And that was where like social media sucked for us during that time period, because that's all we were seeing during that. And we knew that the only way that we were going to be able to have children was through alternative measures, and those measures are not cheap. And so going through that time in Owensboro allowed us, I don't want to say to have peace, but it allowed us to think about maybe other things that like, okay, how do we get ourselves in a point where we can do this? And we could not ever like take a step back and be like, okay, where are the ones and zeros going to make sense to make that happen? And so fast forward a year, we moved back to Murray. I'm still with AT&T, taking over a store here in Murray, and getting plugged back into Journey, you know, slowly through that process. And I'll never forget, there was, you know, we had a small group we were plugged into at that time period, and I'll never forget there was a series we were doing, you know, we were talking through money and this, that, and the other, and then we had the opportunity to do financial peace. So we were walking through all of that, and
it means Financial Peace University, like a class that was helping you get it.
We did FP, Financial Peace University here.
And you're trying to get a handle on how your finances are looking.
Trying to figure out how to create just discipline within our finances. And by this point, I don't want to say that we were comfortable with where we were from our ability to like have a family, but we had a sense of peace in the circumstance that we were in at the moment.
Wow.
And I'll never forget, like, and again, I don't remember the timeline, but what gave us kind of the clarity to be like, hey, like, we need to start pursuing this now, is that we had a family member that just sent us a check randomly and was like, hey, I want this to kind of jumpstart what you guys need to do from an infertility standpoint. And we were like, okay, game on.
Wow.
Like, what is this gonna look like? And so we were walking through that, and we did this series, and like we were really close. Like we were just slowly saving money to make this happen. And like, you wanna talk about like just God showing up in a big way with your community. And at the end of the series we had done, where we were talking about generosity and whatnot, you guys brought us up on stage one Sunday. We were in Lovett Auditorium, I'll never forget it. And we get on stage, and the church had provided us with a monetary donation to help go toward that. And I kid you guys not, like it was like to the dollar what we needed to start going. And I was like, holy crap. Like, all right, here we go.
Yeah.
And, 11 months later, Nash was born on March 21st of 2017. And it's just incredible how God works through, not only through what he does. And this is the thing, right, is that you can try to walk away. You can try to turn down the volume knob on God, but he's still there. Like, he's still showing up. He's going to present himself in the way that he does. Maybe it's somebody bringing you coffee at the right time. Maybe it's that perfectly timed text message or the article that you see. It's like he does such a great job of just like saying like, hey, I'm still here, buddy. Like, I'm not going anywhere. And our faith grew so much leading up to the time that Nash was born. But then you have a kid in your life, and then you're like, holy cow. Now we also have to bring this person up and all of that too. And, and through that, I also realized during my time with AT&T is like, I got so focused on climbing that corporate ladder that like there were things that I was not focusing enough on during that time period. Family was a really big one. Like I worked more than I needed to. And a lot of it was just because I was just so driven during that time period. We got to this point, I was like, man, I'm gonna keep growing. And so an opportunity came up for me to leave AT&T, and that meant that I was gonna have to make a conscious decision to say like, okay, we're gonna be in Western Kentucky forever. And originally, like, that wasn't the plan. Originally, the plan was like, we're going to end up in Nashville.
That's right.
Like, that was the plan.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure that like God was being like, I gave you little Nash. So like, now you can stay in Western Kentucky. And so we had the opportunity to stay there. And this is where we've been ever since. And it's been incredible to see not only God work through our lives, but work through this community. And, for me to just be like, just to have a small part in that and what we're doing here, like, that is what fuels me every week, is being able to share in that.
Can we talk about, because it sounds like, that 2010 to 2017 period, what are some of the, you mentioned some of the people, but, you were involved in worship leading here. What would you say are the main pieces that helped you grow out of this I'm in control mode to, okay, I see God starting to work and I'm following him?
Yeah.
What are some of those things that helped you move that way?
Several things. Being able to get plugged into some of the people here in the church. Like, during that time period, we had also started, there was a group of guys that got together like once a week to just talk through life. And that helped. I started really focusing a lot more into my growth as a leader. And I know that's weird, like I'm gonna talk about work for a minute and how that helped me grow spiritually, but it really did, because there were so many principles that I was following through great leaders like Craig Rochelle, Andy Stanley, Carrie Newhoff during that time period, that like you start listening and
these are pastors who are helping you learn how to lead.
People grow as leaders on the business side, but there's also biblical principles behind that allowed me to say like, man, I can totally use what Craig Rochelle just talked about. Like, I can totally use that at home. I can totally use that in my daily life to just be a better person. And that was the big key for me, is that like I changed my thinking from me to we. And it's like, how do I help we? How do I help my family? How do I pour into this newborn, and how do I help him create some principles in his life that like he can be more like Jesus?
Yeah.
How can I be more like Jesus in the way that I lead at work, the way that I lead at home, the way that I posture myself in the community? And that was biggest thing is that, like, I can be stubborn. I can be rude. Don't look at me like that. I can be selfish at times. And like what I gained through that time period was a huge dose of humility.
Oh, wow.
To know that, like, yeah, I'm not in charge, but also like I have a God that, like, he loves me unconditionally. It doesn't matter that I was a big jerk to that person. Like, he still loves me, but he's also going to be like, dude, you probably need to make that right, though. So that was the big help, is just like being in that mindset to where it's like, okay, like we have disciplines that allow us to be better people, to be more like Jesus.
So let me do some summary real quick. So it sounds like to me like God didn't just use church to move your faith forward. Right? God used all these different pieces in your life throughout. I mean, your marriage, your chasing, having a family, all that stuff molded together. It wasn't just like there was one thing. It was a church service. It was just, it was a lot of things that moved your faith forward. Is that?
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. I think that, actually, I'm confident that God knew that how he was going to get to me was through work.
Oh, wow.
Was not necessarily through church. Church is a great vessel for that, but for me, like during that time period, 2010 to 2017, especially in 2012 when I really started getting into work was all I did. And so when he was able to start showing himself through, hey, you can do this at work, you can try this at work, and then you go, light bulb goes off, and you're like, oh, I can do that anywhere. It doesn't have to just be in an office setting. And that, I mean, I really do feel like that was probably the biggest catalyst for me, was God showing up in the workplace.
Yeah. Well, let's bring it to 2017. Things are going pretty well. You started the family. At least you feel like you've made progress. Work is going pretty well. So how did that kind of period of time prepare you for what was coming next? Because I know that's not the end of the story for you.
Yeah. So it created stability. And during that time period, with stability, always comes the chance that something is going to disrupt that. And 2020 was hard. I mean, nobody here was exempt from what happened in 2020. When COVID happened and the world went on lockdown, and everything changed. And so trying to navigate that life, but then in November of 2020, Diana's dad passed away from COVID. And I thought that, like, I had been through things in my life that would prepare me for navigating the loss of a spouse's father or mother or whatever. But man, we were a broken family during that time period. And, I think the word survival was probably the best way to describe like how we were getting through that. And you couple that with dealing with grief in that, and dealing with depression during that time period, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy inside your home during that time period. And then fast forward to 2021, where we were actually in Princeton the night the tornadoes hit. We were actually in Diane's home that she grew up in when it got hit during that tornado. And so it's like you have that, and you're sitting there and you're asking yourself, like, my God, like, haven't we been through enough? Like, hasn't our family been through enough to like not only have one event, but have two events? And I'll tell you guys, nothing warmed my heart, and nothing allowed me to see God's presence more than when that was happening. And I don't know, to be honest with you, like, we were in a basement, I froze, but my wife had covered over Nash during that tornado, but I could hear her singing Silent Night to him during that time period. And it was quick, right? It was like less than a minute maybe before it was over. But she's singing to him during that time period, and she's sheltering him, and she's covering him. And I'm like, wow, And I knew in that moment, like, the circumstances were awful. The circumstances behind Diane's dad passing away were terrible. Circumstances inside that basement were terrible, but God was still there. God was still with us. He was still watching over us. He was still protecting us. And we moved through that. And what that also created during that time period was another opportunity for us to strengthen our marriage, strengthen our family. The communication was at an all-time high. We both started talking to other people about our issues. We both started doing therapy to help. And it's like, it's created so much discipline in our marriage and in our lives. And then also, another great distraction is just having another kid. So Jude was born last year in September, and he has just been, you think to yourself sometimes, it's like, man, like, when you have another kid, does it get better? But then it's like, we went through those 2 years, and then we got into the last year, and then Jude was born, and then, like, it is amazing to see, like, coming out of the end of all of that tragedy, like, what the good does look like, what it does feel like. And, the communities change that you run with, the circles that you run in may change during that time period, but the one constant through that has been that God is there. God is walking through us. We don't always understand the why, and the why can be really, like, trying to understand that can be really hard. And I'm going to be honest with you, I've got to a point where I was just like, I'm not going to try to understand it. I'm just going to try to accept it and then grow through it. And how do I help build myself better coming out to the other side of that? And it's been a trip, and doesn't mean that there's not going to be another wrench thrown in the spokes at any given moment in time. But again, I think the big piece that I've taken away from that is that you just have to find peace in the moment. You have to try to find the peace inside the chaos. And I think that's really hard for us to do sometimes, to just, like, stop. Because, I'm wired to, like, I just want to figure it out. I want to fix it. I want to go.
That's right.
But where I have found the best way for me to find that is just by saying, like, I know this is out of my control. And just stop and just be still.
Can I have you talk through then, so you're here now, what would you say right now are the habits that you do not want to let go, that you've learned through all this, that help you find that peace in the middle of stuff? What are the things that help keep you on the reminding path that God is with you even when things go wrong? How do you keep that in mind?
I have one or two people that I consider, like, mentors. So it's like, that's the big thing for me is having, and one of those is my wife. I mean, I've not always been the best about being transparent about how I feel.
It's funny.
Stop looking at me like that. Like, but it's hard for us to talk about our feelings, right? Because we're like, can't. No, like, and you can ask most people at work, like, I am not afraid to show how I feel. And I feel like there's power in transparency. And when I allow myself to be vulnerable, when I allow myself to be transparent, is when I find God working the best in my life. And it's not healthy to leave it. Guys, if you're listening, if there's one thing you can take away, it's okay to talk. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to have feelings. Good grief, it's okay to cry. And I'm not saying that I'm a crybaby, but I cry more now. Because it's like, I don't have any problem being me.
Yeah.
And allowing that. I think that's there's one takeaway, being that, and then also having that one or two people that I can confide in that are going to give me real feedback. I don't want people to tell me what I want to hear. And I want those people to be following the same principles, having the same values that I do, so that, like,
so you make a habit of meeting with those people and getting feedback on where you are.
I try really hard to make it a habit.
Yep.
It doesn't always happen, but I do know that those people are a text message away.
Yeah. Well, my final question for you is really quite an easy one, Paul. Why do you keep leading worship then through all this stuff? Because it's not like you quit. Now, I mean, there were seasons where you're like, hey, I got to pull back for a couple months because of work or because of the baby or whatever. But why do you keep doing this up here?
Yeah, because I believe in the words that we sing. Song we were just singing, I don't know if y'all picked that. You didn't pick it on purpose. You have no idea what I was going to talk about today. But right, like the line, weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. What a powerful lyric to hang everything on. There are going to be dark times, but no matter what, joy comes in the morning. And I mean, that's what makes it so easy for me to get up here every week, is that I love the messages that we have, but like music is what speaks to me. And the lyrics, I mean, when you think about and when you go back and you research stories behind some of the songs that we sing, it's like there's so much vulnerability in that. And so if I can get up here on a Sunday and share my story through song, then that's worth it. And I mean, the gig pays too well.
Yeah.
I don't get paid a dime, by the way.
Sausage, biscuits, and gravy. That's what I was about to say. Sausage, biscuits, and gravy is enough for Paul.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, hey, you guys thank Paul for his story and his vulnerability this morning. Man, thank you. This has been encouraging to me. Let me wrap us up by saying the thread line through this Behind My Journey kind of experience, John's story last week, Paul's is that I think we all have the temptation to forget how real the God is that we serve. We get distracted by all the things that we're doing and the things that are going around us, and the circumstances are outside of control. And we just assume that God is somewhere else because we certainly can't feel him sometimes. But this is what faith is. Faith is trusting. And so we as followers of Jesus trust that even when things don't look good or they don't feel good, that we are not alone. And so here's what I want to challenge you guys with this week, just for a 7-day experiment. Would you practice doing what Paul has been practicing for the past almost 15 years now of trying to, hey, when you experience moments of great pain or hurt or disappointment, would you practice in that moment? Would you find a song? Would you sing it and remind yourself that God is with you? I know that seems like super, super feely, touchy-feely, but listen, I'll just be honest with you. If you can sometimes sing words that you're not sure are true, it's just like when you say happy birthday to somebody that you're not really sure you want to be happy on their birthday. It moves your heart to where it should be. So if you can find a song or lyrics or scripture or something to say that you know is true, even when you don't feel it's true, you're showing faith. And God honors humble people who come with faith. So would you take that with you this morning and the rest of this week and try it out? Let me pray for us this morning as we close out. God, thank you so much for what you've done in so many ways through Paul's life to build his faith in you. God, thank you for the people like Brett and Mackenzie that you mentioned that were there to invite him and move him. Thank you for a Wesley Hughes who was like, just come run the board. Thank you for those people. God, let us be those people in this church who are always inviting people to come and just be a part of this. God, we know that there's lots of people in our community who can come here and belong before they ever believe anything that we believe. But you've put us here to bring them here to show them that, God, you are here and available to them, even in the midst of their pain and suffering. So God, help us to be aware of the people around us. God, thank you for Paul's vulnerability. God, I pray this week that we will be vulnerable with the people that we can trust, that we would start to open up about what we're dealing with. And God, most of all, God, help us to be honest and humble before you, that we trust you above and beyond what we experience. Our circumstances are things that you're aware of. And God, in the midst of all that, you can bring us peace and faith and hope and joy and all the things, God. When you are with us, we are okay. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.